Thank you very much indeed, Jerry. Thank you all very, very much indeed. I always feel, whenever I'm emceeing something or moderating something, particularly in New York, I think immediately of that great moderator I'm sure you all remember. We used to collect his mistakes, I remember, the one and only Mr. Ed Sullivan. Do you remember some of those marvelous, I used to collect them, some of those marvelous introductions he did. I remember one where he said, do you remember that one where he said, "Here they are, ladies and gentlemen, 3 young ladies from Detroit, the Supremes. Tell me, girls, where are you from?" I mean, what do you say? On the David Frost show, we used to have on a Monday night shell-shocked victims of Ed's introductions the night before. I remember one day we had Jack Jones on, and he'd been on a Monday night, and he'd been on Ed's show the day before, and he'd done the rehearsal with one audience at 4, and in the rehearsal, Ed had beckoned him over at the end of his song. And that, if you remember, was the greatest accolade in American show business, that if Ed had liked your song and beckoned you over. Jose Feliciano said he once did it to him, and there was this terrible long pause before. But Ed really did it that day, because then when he got Jose over, he said, "Jose has really overcome his handicaps. He's not only blind, he's Puerto Rican." 1 million letters from Puerto Rico. They're still answering at the moment. Anyway, beckons Jack Jones over and says to Jack Jones on the rehearsal, "Wasn't Alan Jones your father?" And Jack said, "He still is." And after the rehearsal, Ed said, "Hey, that was very good. Let's keep it in tonight." Jack said, "Okay, it's your show. Okay, sure, okay." So that night, end of his song, Ed beckons him over and says, "Is Alan Jones still your father?" I mean, what do you say? One day on a Monday night, day after Easter, Joan Rivers was still ashen on the Monday night because she'd been on the Easter Sunday program. This was about 1970, this particular one. And it had been a very religious show that Easter Sunday night, and it had opened with Eddie Albert reading the Bible, and then the West Point Glee Club had sung a religious song. And at the end of the song, Ed had said, quote, "The West Point Glee Club, ladies and gentlemen, they're off to Vietnam tomorrow, and many of them will probably never be coming back, and now it's comedy time with Joan Rivers." I mean, would you go on in a circumstance like that? You know? He was once doing an appeal for funds to fight tuberculosis, and he said, "And remember, help stamp out TV." He said. Maybe he was right about that. But actually, oh yeah, I remember, the worst one actually was Richard Hearn, English guy, Mr. Pastry his name was, and he'd got one particular bit of shtick called the Lancers. And he'd been in the 22, 23 years of the Ed Sullivan Show, this was the last year, he'd been on 28 times, this was his 29th time, and he said, "What would you like me to do, Mr. Sullivan?" And he said, "The Lancers." Oh no, he wanted to do something else. He said, "Please let me do something else, because this is the only show I've ever been on in America, and people in America are going to think that this is the only thing I can..." No. But a sort of compromise was worked out, whereby Ed would introduce him and say, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the 29th time, we're delighted to have Richard Hearn, Mr. Pastry. What have you got for us tonight, Richard?" And Richard would say, "Well, Ed, I thought I'd start with a song, then do a dance, and end with some juggling." And Ed would say, "Oh, no, please do my favourite, the Lancers." And he said, "All right, then, for you, Ed, I'll do that." So Ed would get what he wanted, but at least the seeds of versatility had been sown in the minds of the great American public. So there they are, live that evening. And so here he is, 29th time, Richard Hearn, Mr. Pastry. "What have you got for us tonight, Richard?" And Richard said, "Well, Ed, I thought I'd start with a song, then do a dance, and end with some juggling." And Ed said, "Fine." Leaving Richard Hearn saying, "Oh, please let me do the Lancers, it's the only thing I know." Anyway, our tribute to Ed Sullivan. And now my tribute to our panel. We've got a terrific panel, and I'll read out the names of the 5 members of the panel, and then we'll ask you to welcome them with the thunderous ovation that they so justly deserve. Michael Kuhn is with us, the President and CEO of Polygram Filmed Entertainment. Peter Bart is joining us, the Vice President, Editor-in-Chief of Variety and Daily Variety, and interviewer to Michael Eisner. And Harvey Weinstein is here, co-chairman of Miramax Films. Linda Obst, who of course is the producer, representing the production community, Linda Obst Productions. And Jonathan Dolgen, the chairman of Viacom Entertainment Group, who is working at the moment to try and see how you can do a sequel to Titanic. And we'd like you to welcome them all to join us here to talk about the movies. There wasn't a plasma, but now there is. Michael? There's a place over here. There we are. Welcome to you all, and let's begin with the Titanic effect. Michael, let me start with you. What looks at me in horror? What is going to be the effect of the enormous success of Titanic?
I think rather limited, actually, because the film business is strewn with examples of really phenomenal movies, both at the low-budget end and the high-budget end. And I think those of us who work every day in the movie business recognize them as one-off phenomenon. And I don't think it has any real long-term effects as such on what most of us on the podium here do every day of the week.
Not that much effect. Harvey, do you think people are going to try and copy? Are going to think that megapics are the way to go? Not you necessarily.
I don't know about that, but I think Jonathan Dolgen, Peter Chern, and Bill Mechanic should get a big raise.
You know, there actually is quite an extraordinary phenomenon, as Michael Eisner would say, right now at all the test previews with respect to Titanic. I was speaking yesterday to the worldwide president of marketing at Fox. He said in the past 10 previews that he's gone to, sneak previews, when the focus group afterwards is asked why they rated the movie excellent or very good, and there are just 25 hands going up for very good, and he said, why didn't you rate it as excellent? And the entire focus group says, well, it's not the Titanic. And I'm actually kind of worried about it, in the sense that I think the bar has been raised, not necessarily on the kinds of pictures that Harvey does, or the kinds of pictures that Michael so successfully does, but with respect to studio pictures, where we're forced to pay top star dollar and deliver entertainment, you know, with massive marketing at tentpole times of the year. I think the bar has been raised in physical production, and I also think the bar has been raised in terms of being able to say no to directors. We've just given enormous applause on the highest possible scale that we award to a person who went wildly over budget in pursuit of a dream. And in the American way, we reward that dream, but it's going to be very hard the next time a director says to us, I want more, I want another 10 days, I want another 10 weeks, I want another 5 months, I want another $10 million, to come up with the argument of why Jim Cameron can't and he can and he can't. I'm a little more concerned than Michael.
Peter, do you think that Hollywood will resist this copying? I mean, we saw it with things like The Sound of Music led to a number of mega musicals which didn't succeed particularly well. Do you think people will go on regardless, or they will be affected?
Well, if you notice the tendency to emulate in the blockbuster business, last year there were 2 volcano pictures, one of which killed the other off. This week there's a network asteroid television movie, which will be followed this summer, 2 big blockbusters this summer, both concern asteroids about to strike the Earth. I think the Titanic distorts things in the sense that the blockbuster business, the tentpole business at the studios, is actually a kind of shoddy shape. There seems to be an absence of discipline, an absence of fresh ideas, a tendency to imitate. Things are not happy. Jonathan?
Well, imitation is a problem, I guess.
Pull the mic a bit closer, Jonathan.
Again, I get to say, you're actually asking me to speak louder? Sure. No, I guess the observation is part of the problem with the business, and there is sometimes a tendency to emulate, almost as if it were some sort of force of nature. But that doesn't last for long, because it's trying to decide what you want to do creatively based on what's happened before is kind of like driving a car and trying to figure out where you're going by looking in the rearview mirror. It won't take you very far, and I guess people will say things like that, but I don't think it'll take them very far, certainly creatively.
What principles do you generalize from? When we copy the box office, what are we going to copy here? Is it more movies on boats? Is it movies have to be of an epic scale? Is it the American dream gloopy love story is working again? Or is it simply the teen market is given a romantic story in a muscle context? And
I think one thing to copy, Linda, is this, that Titanic proved one thing above all, and that is that special effects do not have to be used in Twister or Speed 2, that you can tell a personal story with effects. And this could indeed have a somewhat radical effect on the future of the business.
Do you think there's too little romance then in movies? I mean, that the romance ingredient was important here. Do you think Hollywood is too slow to indulge in romance, Harvey?
No, I don't think they're too slow, but I think that it obviously worked. And, you know, I think that any time you imitate, it's a prescription for failure. You know, this happened. It was a spectacular success. You know, Gone with the Wind happened, and, you know, I don't know, maybe they made Jezebel, or I don't know if that was before or after, but, you know, no one rushes out and says, all right, let's go make 20 Civil War movies because Gone with the Wind worked. I think you just have to say this was a phenomenon. These two studios, Paramount and Fox, marketed it brilliantly, and they deserve a tremendous amount of success. What they have done is raise the poll for how much money, you know what I mean, a movie can gross. You know, so the potentiality now is all changed, and that's exciting for the business. But go out and, you know, say, all right, let's have a teen love story, you know what I mean, set it in, you know, in the middle of a volcano that destroys, you know, 50, I mean, please. You know, that's just like, forget it.
If anybody asks, were there any kids on the Lusitania? Don't invest with them.
I've gotten 3 Noah pitches, you know. But you know, it's an interesting question about romance, because only 3 weeks before Titanic opened, I had a great conversation with Nora Ephron, who was talking about the death of gloopy love stories, that you couldn't really do 40s romantic melodramas anymore, and if they were straightforward gloopy love stories, they just wouldn't work, and romance had moved into the romantic comedy genre. So by and large, you told romantic stories, you played war or you played house, right? And you told romantic stories in romantic comedies. And teen girls would go and play house, and they would drag along their dates, and you could get some weekend business out of it. But what Titanic is very interesting is a gloopy love story that you allow yourself to enjoy as a teenager because it's inside this muscular effect structure, because there's something cool production-wise. It has the right stuff somehow. So it doesn't feel like a girl's movie. And so you don't have to club the boy over the head with the pole to get him to come that weekend, you know? And I think maybe what that means is there's some kind of mixed genre happening, you know, Lusitania with a, not quite Lusitania, not necessarily on a boat, but effects.
Were there any kids on the Bismarck?
What about the business, one of the other trends
here?
What
was the big blimp? Yeah.
What about the question of partnerships? You were mentioning, Harvey was mentioning there, obviously, Fox and Paramount on this. Michael Eisner was talking about not having partners on Armageddon. Does the idea of partnerships appeal to you as a trend, Michael, with other studios?
I think if you get the order of priorities right, the order of priorities are how many movies can I make 100% myself and believe in and finance, because if you believe in the movie, make it. If you don't believe in it, sharing the not belief won't help you very much. Having said that, once you've got your core base number of movies together you can finance, you believe in, you're going to bet on the upside, and you're going to take the downside, and it's your neck on the line, Then, and over and above that, there's tons of movies to be done on a partnership basis, which gives you a bigger portfolio, more strikes at bat. And that's very helpful, and that's why we've done partnerships, whether it's individual pickups, like on the Spice World movie, or Train Spotting, or deal recently with Castle Rock, with Warner's on Castle Rock. But they're over and above what we consider to be our core base of movies that we are going to bat for. And I think the worst reason, and so often when I have discussions with other studios, the reason they want to partner is because they don't really believe in the project. So why should I believe in the project or anyone else? And to share a loss is no great business philosophy.
Now, are you planning more such partnerships, John?
Yeah, to us, it makes sense. I mean, Michael's exactly right. If the picture is not a good movie and you don't like the idea, it doesn't become better by having half of it. I mean, that's not logical. So you have to kind of like creatively whatever you're doing. For us, it made sense from just describing it's really a portfolio observation about it. If you had money to manage and you decided you want to be in the stock market, would you have one stock? If you wanted bonds, would you have one bond? I mean, it's just the notion of the economic side of the creative observation is that you would really probably want to, from our point of view, diversify how much money you'd put out in a variety of ways and configurations, and try to take a somewhat different economic look at the structure. So for us, it's 100% correct that the creative observation is what's got to be made first, and then secondarily, we try to, in our minds, put it in some sort of economic mix where we run the range of 100% financing the film to just distributing it for a fee. And inside that meld of all the things we're trying to do, trying to make good economic sense, create a good economic envelope in which to put the creative enterprise. And the gift of it is trying, I'm sorry.
Harvey.
No, after you.
I was going to tell you what the gift was and decided why share.
I've enjoyed working with Jonathan and Sherry on Talented Mr. Ripley, which Anthony Minghella, who did English Patient, is going to do next, Matt Damon, and then All the Pretty Horses, and we're going to do with Sony. And I think what's really interesting is you meet your competition, and then you just see that they're terrific people, and you say, my God, what are we fighting for? And it opens up doors and other lines of communication, so there's a side benefit to it as well. And I think, I don't know, two heads sometimes do work better than one, because somebody comes up with a great idea. If Sherry comes up with a great idea on a script, then we're all the mutual, beneficiaries of it. So it's a good check and balance to have people who do exactly what you do, work on a project together. I'm enjoying it.
And in fact, all we're talking about here with the mega budgets and so on, at the other end of the scale, everybody is, not everybody, but most people are having niche organizations and so on to try and exploit the cheaper picture and so on. And that's always been where you began. Do you feel all those people are sort of copying you, Harvey?
I feel like Israel and everybody is the 6 Arab nations around me. So we're constantly...
But how do you feel about this?
Do you feel like Netanyahu or Perez?
No, I feel more like Perez, but we have a good Air Force and a good Mossad.
Peter, do you think, before we leave Titanic completely, do you think there's anything sociological to learn in the success of the film? People always like to analyze this shows that we're a nation that is looking for this or that, quite apart from the fact a very well-made film and all of that. Do you think it says anything about a loss of romance or the loss of ships or whatever?
I think it says something about that there are so many teenage girls in the United States who clearly have to get a life. But apart from that, the one thing about what we're talking about in terms of the niche pictures, one thing about the Titanic that was troubling to me is that in the last 3 months, it had this extraordinarily clear corridor. Namely, I don't think anybody at this table could name any pictures that opened up against it. Some of them were deal pictures, some of them were would-be, wannabe niche pictures. But the fact that they were at a time when there's supposed to be this extraordinarily glut of film, that there could be 3 months on the calendar when there's nothing that would sail along to challenge this thing, that to me was rather depressing.
They were
Anybody
all
have-
waiting for my next picture to come out so they could bunch up around that.
I don't know. I saw a terrific movie, U.S. Marshals. I really liked that movie. It was a good popcorn movie, and I thought it was as good as The Fugitive. I just think the Titanic just, creamed it. I think for exactly what Linda's saying, you start to say, okay, well, can compare for that entertaining audience, not the, movie, the movies that Miramax traditionally makes or the movies that Polygram makes. It's hard to, to live with that. I mean, and I'll tell you the other effect is, I know that we pulled Scream 2 out of foreign. I mean, Titanic is doing $100 million in France and Germany. We were set to open in March, so let's get the hell out of there. I mean, we're going in April and May. We abandoned ship.
What's interesting sociologically is that I've had a lot of conversations this week about how vapid Titanic was and how empty it was and how it was just this thing for teenagers. And then last night, I heard Stanley Crouch make the best argument for Titanic I've heard all along in terms of theme. And I don't think it's just teenage girls who need a life, although the rebellious teenage daughter is a myth that will not die, right? There's a lot of American myths in Titanic that really work. It's a pro-immigrant at a time where it's sort of an anti-immigration kind of feeling. It's very pro-immigrant. It's very pro-American dream. It's very, the lower class can take on the upper class. It's entitled, and the upper class is somehow corrupt. And the moment where Leonardo DiCaprio takes the helm of his boat and says, "This is my boat," and owns it, is a moment of great sort of mythic engagement. And I feel a sort of whoosh go through the audience at that moment of owning that lack of passivity. It's almost a kind of conservative reaction against that postmodern passivity you see in teenagers. It's, this is my boat, this is my life, I'm going to make something of it. And that's the American dream too. It has a Rocky quality in that sense. And you can't kill that myth with a stick.
He actually made a great movie, and it's something to do with it as well, no?
It's gorgeous.
It's a perfect, for me, I mean, nothing is ever perfect. You go into the Sistine Chapel and you say, a little more blue, perhaps? But putting that aside,
Harvey's.
but it's a perfect thing. I mean, as constructed. I mean, you may say a little bit more blue, whatever the functional equivalent of that is, but he's made a perfect thing on its own terms. It's totally engaging. It's totally overwhelming in some ways. It uses technology in a new and special way. It makes you feel very much a time and place, and it has great thematic resonance amongst people, not just here, but every place. So I think that you have to, as we try to analyze, and I've been reading people analyzing why they didn't like it over the last week, I guess voting for the minority. These I know, I like these people, by the way, because they were the 6 other folks who voted for McGovern along with me way back when. So I felt some cultural affinity to them. But other than that, I mean, most people were engaged by this thing because he did something very special, and I think we honored it with our time, and it transcended not just the American observations about it, but the overseas business means some of those very American observations. They're really basic human. They're basic human emotions, and he created a very special thing, and I think we're honoring that with everybody laying down their $8 to try to see it over and over again.
What about the thought that came up this morning that in fact the $2 million film and the $200 million film, there should be different prices of admission for them? What do you think about that, Michael?
Rubbish.
Rubbish. Why?
Well, I didn't hear anyone complain about being paid $8 for the $2 million movie. And when I make a movie such as Mr. Bean, which is coming on for $250 million gross around the world, it costs $17 million, why should I be paid less? Because people enjoyed it just as much as another movie that grossed $250 million and cost $70 million to make. I mean, I think it's a complete nonsense argument.
The art observation would be that you would pay for the art object based on how much paint and bronze was used, as opposed to how much art and beauty was contained. It's not a logical observation.
It's also a slippery slope. Then we start bargaining. Then we start bargaining off prices of tickets per product. I mean, there's no there.
It would have one interesting benefit. It would actually have the studio lying up the cost of their films as opposed to the other way around, which would be an interesting thing. But other than that, just mischievous, observation. I can't see anything cute about it.
What did you think of the theory, Peter, when you heard it?
Well, it's sort of surreal. However, you know, there was a time, a generation ago, where there were roadshow pictures, exclusive runs. Even I think Gandhi may have been the last one. And you know, a picture like The English Patient arguably could have opened in one city, charged reserved seats, had an intermission, it needed an intermission, charge a lot more. I mean, it seems to me on a limited basis, to give the devil his due, there may be some argument in returning to that traditional form of, how do you feel, Harvey?
Well, I think that, you know, I've got Cinema Paradiso, and we actually have the director's cut of the movie, which, contrary to rumor, we didn't cut, but was actually cut by his French co-producer. And I think we're going to experiment with that because it's 3 hours and 10 minutes and put an intermission in and see what that does. I think one of the great things, I agree with Michael, one of the great things about going to the movies is, you know, it's so democratic. You just go into the theater, everybody pays the same price. So, I mean, it's one of those last bastions of where, you know, there isn't a corporate box and, you know, and, you know, you don't have to feel excluded. It's just so accessible, which is why it's the most popular medium. So I don't want to, you know, lose that. But I think when a movie is really long, sometimes maybe you can make a special presentation, and that way you subsidize the one performance a night that you can get. You make it an intermission. And I disagree with Peter. I thought The English Patient was just fine. And it grossed $220 million around the world.
Talking of Europe there, Harvey, one of the trends is, you've done this and lots of studios have done this, is new links with overseas entities or new entities overseas, as you've done in the UK and so on. What effect is that going to have on you, and what effect is it going to have on the way that Europeans make their movies?
Well, Miramax has recently done a deal with 3 fabulous executives in England, Treya Hoving, Colin Leventhal, and David Aukin, 2 of whom ran Films 4 very successfully. What it does for us is it broadens our horizons. It takes on entrepreneurs like my brother and myself, who are traditionally terrible at delegating, and forces us to, you know, learn proper administrative technique, and also to allow other people to bring their creativity and autonomy, you know, to the table. So for me, it's been incredibly, you know, not only reassuring that, you know, I mean, that it can work both ways, but just a fascinating process, because this is the second part, you know, of our career, and now it's, you know, I mean, either we just stay megalomaniacal, I mean, you know, which worked for the first 15 years, or now start to delegate and, you know, be a little bit more statesman-like.
John, do you think it's a good idea, those sort of link-ups with the foreign entities?
It depends. I'm not sure exactly what you mean, those sort of. I mean, there's obviously our business is an international world business. Obviously, there's great talent outside the United States. So yes, it makes sense to be involved. The exact nature of the arrangement, I wouldn't want to comment on it, because it can be in a variety of arrangements. I think that, you know, for us, we would expect to see an increasingly vital European filmmaking business, hopefully with ideas that can have resonance past their own borders. And I think that'll be good for everyone, revitalize some of those local cinema businesses, which is good for us as well. So we see nothing wrong with it, and we see it obviously as a place to look for talent and ideas in a world in which there are probably a limited number of really good ideas.
What could be wrong with it, if you look at the downside, potentially, it hasn't happened yet, is that here's a moment in history where indigenous cinemas in many parts of the world, indigenous cinema, is really making an extraordinary comeback. It would be a tragedy at that moment if the Hollywood studios somehow imposed a decision-making process on that which discouraged it or Hollywoodized it or whatever. That conceivably could happen.
I think whoever does that will fail doing it. I mean, I think the idea would be, if you tried that, I wouldn't say you couldn't try. I mean, people have been through, we've gone through that cycle, everybody having offices in London, and that cycle basically resulted in huge economic loss for everyone as they try to impose their ideas and cost structures and creative notions upon what was otherwise a well-run business. So I think whoever tries that won't do well with it.
Michael, how do you think you bring films obviously into the States and so on, but a very worldwide business? How well are American films sold around the world?
Well, I think you've obviously been primed on this, as this is my particular hobby horse. It's a remarkable fact that around the world, American movies are so incredibly dominant at the box office, much more dominant than Anglo-American music is. And yet, when you go around the world, the structure of the Hollywood studios, by and large, is so outdated compared to what is required in today's world. And I speak without exception. And in a world when the maximization of revenues and margins is paramount in the movie business, when the manipulation of windows, whether it's theatrical or pay or video, should be left to the lowest competent level, that is to say the national organization, it's completely amazing the disarray, the lack of thought, the lack of innovation that goes into the studios, organizations internationally. And long may it continue. And in fact, I'm about to write a letter to the European Commissioner begging him to keep UIP in operation for many years, and I will personally agree a subvention from Polygram to ensure that this happens should he decide to reverse his decision on that matter.
Do you think that, do you agree with that, John?
I'd be delighted to mail the letter for him. I mean, the observations are, for me, in the international marketplace, the marketplace has progressed so rapidly in size and scope and changed so rapidly, not only just the size of the business, but the way business is conducted. The need for marketing in what we describe as American terms, with American spending levels in at least 2 or 3 major territories. And in some respects, the organizations, as all human organizations, is trailing, is not operating on a real-time basis in the event of change. I think the organizations out there that are good are seeking to bring themselves current with market conditions, and the good ones will do well because of that, and the ones who don't change quickly enough will do less well. And I think that's the general observation.
Harvey.
One of the things that I like about what Polygram is doing is, as a, I think, British-based / Dutch-based company, they bring things like Mr. Bean or The Borrowers, things that, you know, are part of the cultural, the Anglo-cultural, their own background, and then use techniques to mass market those movies. So in a sense, they introduce us, to new characters, new stars, and I think that's just forgetting the profit-loss aspect of this. I just think that's exciting because it reinvents the business. If Titanic is an old, new idea, then so is Mr. Bean, because it's like Laurel and Hardy, or, it goes back to the greatest traditions of our business, and at the same, which is a great clown doing what great clowns do, and then it also is just so uniquely, new in the last 20 years. So I'm hope that our British team isn't saying, let's make Huckleberry Finn, which they're not going to be doing, but finds that thing that's intrinsic, and brings it forward. And that's what's exciting to me.
Do you think, in fact, people often write about how they'll be under $20 million and over $75 million, as if there's no films in the middle? Is there any truth to that? Those sort of predictions?
Well, I make those films in the middle, right? And they're endangered. But there's sort of not any such thing. It's very difficult to make a $20 million studio film. There's maybe with the new teen market, there will be a way without movie stars of making studio movies between 15 and 12 and $20 million. But by and large, if you are going to drive an idea to the marketplace, what I call an endangered species, a notion as opposed to a high concept, not a tent pole, but a script, you need movie stars in order to do it, and movie stars don't cut their price for the major studios, and it drives you to, 20 above the line before you even get going, and so a small script becomes a $35 million movie, $40 million movie, $60 million movies have become average. An enormous part of that, until the Titanic production factor just kicked in, an enormous, obviously, quotient of that is the star power that it takes to open a character-driven movie. because studios aren't in the platforming business, by and large. So I do fear for the middle-level movie. Sadly, or ironically, the thing that seems to be saving the endangered species movie is the teen market. Because the stars that are being replenished are less expensive because they haven't opened that many movies yet. And 3 more movies, we won't be able to afford them, and they'll become $35 million movies. But interestingly, Harvey and his brother helped find that market for us. Unfortunately, on the week I had a movie opening. These movies can be made for a price right now inside the studio system, and the question is, once we identify those stars who reliably open movies, their prices will rise, and those will become $30 million movies all over again. So to me, it's a problem, and it's one of the reasons making movies with a polygram or a Miramax is very attractive, or a Searchlight, and we're starting these smaller divisions because there's possibly a way in which we can get talent to reduce their prices and therefore make movies in the responsible way that the smaller companies are able to do.
Do you find, John, for instance, that you're fighting an everlasting battle and sometimes losing battle against escalating costs and talent costs and so on?
Well, I think you're locked in this in this issue of how to run your business against a rising tide of costs that you can't solely control, because there's someone else who may pay a price that escalates the cost that you might otherwise pay for a piece of talent. We had that experience last year. There was a piece of talent. We decided we wouldn't pay more than X, and having done that, within 36 hours, someone paid him not what we said no to, but a price in excess of what we had said no to. And so
you had to match it.
No, we didn't make the movie.
You didn't make the movie.
Sorry, we didn't make the movie.
That's rare.
But so you do deal in that world. I mean, it's driven by basic Adam Smith. There are if you list the star power, what you would view as stars that would open a film, and the number of films that would make it in a year, you're going to come to a number that's no more than 15 movies. And there are 160 movies, roughly speaking, being released by the majors in more than 400 screens each year. That leaves an awful lot of movies that those folks can't be in, which is also driving up the level of prices for everyone else. So I think that I'd like to believe in Adam Smith's sense that the economic reality will have come, the studios will come to grips with that economic reality, and we'll probably see a somewhat lessening of those number of films, which will have a salutary impact on not on the real stars, but on that price level below it, which will make it more likely that some of these other films can be made. The difficulty with making some of these other films is that, I mean, some of these observations, like all conventional wisdom, I mean, the English translation of that conventional wisdom could be that under 10 or $15 million, how much can you lose? Okay, so it takes creative pressure off you. And over $80 million, you have a star, so you feel you'll be guaranteed something in it. And somewhere in the netherworld, you actually have to make the picture.
It's good.
And people have to work on concept and script and casting and marketing in a more difficult way. But I think people actually have had success with that. And I don't really believe that people are honing to that conventional wisdom as much as people would like to say about it. We had a lot of success with it last year.
The conventional wisdom is in crisis right now because the movie stars who make $20 million a picture aren't systematically opening pictures. I mean, that's the crisis of the studio system this year, is that it's not automatic if you pay $20 million that your baby boomer generation movie star is going to open that movie. And you're in the era of mega blockbusters in the ID4 Godzilla Titanic era, which does not require movie stars. So you have a new star being production. You have reliable stars who are the only ones that can give any degree of comfort for an experimental or not necessarily commercial blockbuster kind of script, and those guys aren't necessarily doing it. There's a glut of reliance on them that's made the audience a little bit more skeptical and intelligent and discerning in the choices it's making.
Linda, there's a glut period.
Yeah,
I mean,
there is.
That's the worst part of it. If the movie stars are unreliable at opening pictures, it's because they're faced with 8 movies a week. I mean, and it's not even the 8 movies a week. It's just the fact that 3 of them are the same theme.
Well, or the same audience.
Targeted to the same audience, and 3 thrillers open within 2 weeks of each other. I mean, you come out of distribution and marketing meetings today, and your team says to you, look, I think I can find a week.
Correct.
You know, that I'm clean. And you know what happens? They're celebrating the fact that they can put a romantic comedy on June 17th, you know, and there's not 3 other romantic comedies that weekend. Forget that there's 3 romantic comedies the weekend before and 3 coming up ahead. But they said, wow, we landed. You know, somebody's doing a big action movie that date, you know, so we can sneak the romantic comedy in. I mean, the distribution schedule looks like a minefield combined with a chessboard, and it's just taking unbelievable skills, you know, to dance through that particular situation.
And it's driving up marketing costs enormously. The only way you can compete in a glut of movies is by a glut of marketing. So whose signal is strongest to get through the noise? That's money, and that once again raises the costs of the whole enterprise exponentially.
Well, it takes you back to that Jack Valenti's number that was cited this morning. I mean, if the typical picture costs $75 million to produce and market, this is daunting in the sense that it discourages the risk-taking process. You go with those stars, even, as Linda says, those stars who have proven they can't open a picture, simply because at those numbers you can't afford to take risks. And history has certainly proven that if you can't take risks, you're really asking for it.
Where does Jack Valenti get these figures from? Harvey, is that your average cost of
That's
marketing?
high. That feels high.
That's my budget for a year.
I think someone should have a word with Jack Valenti and explain to him that when he bandies these figures around, it gives us incredible problems with these guys here. And when you look at his movies and my movies, I don't know where these figures come. I don't recognize any
Michael,
of them.
those are probably major studio figures, and they're probably true.
Is that
You know,
with
that
marketing?
$23 million per studio movie marketing average.
Marketing.
I bet that's true, because what he's
That's
saying
not
is the
open.
movie costs 50, and there's another 25 on the average marketing movie. I see some of those figures. I mean, you know, the studios spend $40–50 million to market some
Yeah,
movies.
but a lot. Well, then all I
you
can
average
say.
it out.
Yeah, all I can say is that shows extreme lack of discipline, because on the movie star side that we were just talking about, no one forces you to hire a $20 million player. No one. If you make that choice, I think whoever was repeating that great remark of Sam Goldwyn that he's overpriced but worth it this morning was correct. I mean, there are stars that you say are outrageous, and then you happily write the check out there. But the thing that's completely uncontrollable, and remembering the days when you started, Harvey, was that you could take a movie out and you could do it with nothing. You could go and establish word of mouth, sue the MPAA, do all the tricks you used to do, and you could get a movie. You could get a movie open. Now it is impossible. You couldn't do that again today. And all these startups that Paramount have, Universal, they're all going to have to spend, whether it's whatever it is, money on media, on hard media. And that is the scary thing. And the lack of discipline on the studios, on the amount they spend on marketing, ratchets up the cost, because there's no way you can do anything. If there's a tremendous noise out there, you have to make yourself heard. It's no good saying, I refuse to spend X to open this movie.
It's not necessarily a discipline thing. It's not necessarily a discipline thing. It's really, in some respects, what Linda was talking about and Harvey was talking about, is a market force thing. Now, some people aren't spending more than they should, but the stats, when I looked at them for last year and for the year before, were there were 19 weekends last year and the year before on which 4 or more films opened on 400 or more screens, and 31 weekends on which there were 6 films that opened that weekend or the weekend before. We're still heavy into them.
Well, the question I always ask my marketing people, and I'm sure you ask yours, is when they say there's no weekend between now and 2004 to open a movie, is you say, well, how come for 4 weeks last summer, last fall, last spring, I couldn't find anything to go and see? And the answer is because when they count all those movies, 80% of them are rubbish. And if you've got something that works through it, it works through it. And that's the issue. It's not how many movies, but how many movies, the real movies, open in a weekend.
Yes and no.
You see it time and again.
If you're opening 2 movies on a genre, if the bad movie takes 4 and you're opening a teen movie, that's $4 million you're not taking that weekend, because they went to see that other film, and it has some impact on the total economics. I mean, that's just even if it's a bad movie. I mean, if you have $4 million worth of business, that money was otherwise going to go someplace.
But I never heard any of my marketing people say, you know what, how many weeks has Titanic been out now?
15.
15 weeks out, we're going to have to watch out for Titanic. They never told me that. They will tell me that that particular weekend, like this one or the one before, there was so many other movies that have been and gone and no one's ever seen.
And since the
And
first of the year, how many
no one would have
films?
said that your movie was playing and would be going up last weekend, Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you have a Scream, which is a teen demographic that goes directly against a Titanic on an international basis, watch out. Because, you know, we saw what happened. You know, we tested a market. We went into Australia. We opened into enormous business, but Titanic just sucks up the whole, you know, market. So we had that big opening, and then we just said, look, adjust to the marketplace. But then, you know, then these sort of adult movies like Good Will Hunting and As Good as It Gets have just, you know, it's like stayed the steady course with Titanic's 15 weeks, and we're either number 3 or 4, they're 5, and we're 6.
What a wonderful
And we just stayed, thank you, I mean, you know, it just stayed the course.
All right, well, let's do what George Bush called the vision thing for a moment. Looking ahead to this conference in 10 years' time, I mean, what is going to be the shape, what are going to be the differences to the film business 10 years from now in the importance of video, in the nature of the theatre chains, I mean, what is going to happen in the next 10 years to movies? Harvey?
Peter Bart is going to have a little television show, and he's going to host it. And what's going to happen is, instead of bidding on scripts the way we now do, we get them from agencies and things like that, Peter's going to host the show, and he's going to have Quentin Tarantino and Jim Cameron as his guests, and we're just going to, you know, save costs, and Dolgen, myself, I mean, you know, Linda, we're all going to have to bid. I mean, you know, he's going to say, tonight's guest is Jim Cameron, here's his new script.
Like home shopping.
Like
Your
home
bid.
shopping. Home shopping with Peter Bart. You know, so we're going to be sitting in our pajamas, I mean, you know, as the next script comes up. That's what I think the future of movie business is.
That's a great vision. Linda, what's your vision?
Well, you know, I don't even understand the hardware of today. I'm not really a hardware person, and I need 3 assistants to help get me online, so I really don't understand hardware, but I do have a little sense of software, just because I read a lot. And my sense from the market, I read a wonderful quote in Vanity Fair this week that said, the baby boomers who are now running this thing and making all these decisions, and have been probably for a decade now, more and more, are the generation, the culture that thought they would always rule, and they turn around and discover, they thought there would never be another culture, and they turn around and discover there is. And I think what's happening is we are going to cede to whatever comes after us. The software is going to the hands of the generation that follows us. It's very different. There are children. We'll be making movies for our children, and that has something to do with technology. They were wired, they were born on the net, and they were born with effects. Their first movie was toys, you know, and they are a different market than we are. And I think we're going to have a hard time adjusting and learning and regulating the tastes of boomers is going to cede to the tastes of their children. And so from a software point of view, it's interesting.
That's very interesting. Michael, what are you projecting for the next 10 years and starting to take note of now?
Well, the first thing, I'm a tremendous optimist about the movie business. When you look at the future, I think the one thing that everyone has a good deal of consensus on is the importance of the digital revolution. And for once, those catchphrases are hard to argue with. It's digital, and it will be revolutionary, and it's here now. And when you look at that and you say, well, what are the important constituent parts of that as far as content is concerned? Someone said this morning, content is, you don't watch digital, you watch the content on digital. And if you analyze what content there is, there's information content and there's entertainment content. And if you look at the information content, that has certain rather worrying things about it. While it can boom tremendously, it combusts tremendously as well and has no residual value. So if someone comes up with a newer, better, faster, sexier, cheaper version of Bloomberg, however big and successful Bloomberg is, they can disappear tomorrow without any residual value. On the other hand, if you look at a film library which has been improved over the years, you can have a company that's run into the ground for 20 years like as has been detailed by Peter in his book on MGM, and the thing still sells for probably more than was ever spent on the movies in the first place when it comes on the market again. In the entertainment area, there's a further distinction that needs to be made, and that is the difference between filmed entertainment, and especially Hollywood filmed entertainment, which is unique in that it has a huge worldwide attractiveness, and the other very, very important piece of entertainment content, which is sport, which by its nature is regional, local, and even those who thought there was such a thing as European soccer have been somewhat disappointed, realizing that the British may like Italian soccer, but they don't give a toss about German soccer, and so on. And so if you look in the, if you agree that the digital revolution is important, and if you want to say what are the main beneficiaries of that going to be, it's content. And what sort of content? Well, information content is undoubtedly important, but it's less a less better bet than the filmed entertainment content, which is a better bet than sport, which you can't own anyway. And there are only 6 or 7 suppliers of that Hollywood content in the world, and the demand growing, as it's growing at the moment, is just fantastic. And I think as long as we can be disciplined in our financials and make sure that we turn a profit, the value growth will be spectacular, and the opportunities are just tremendous. And I think that a conference 10 years from now will need a hall 6 or 7 times the size of this one to accommodate all the people interested and wanting to learn about filmed entertainment.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. One of the other interesting things where sports magnifying its takings in Britain at the moment, most of the money is going straight to the players, and just absolutely direct, talking of talent fees and so on, but I mean straight, isn't it? Some of the players are getting 3 million instead of $500,000 and so on. Peter, what's your vision 10 years from now?
Well, I took Harvey's offer already, so I don't need a vision. but I think that maybe 10 years from now, that this tacit bifurcation that exists in the industry today, whereby they're the tentpole pictures, which make all the money, and Harvey's domain, that this will be somehow institutionalized, so that insofar as the process of choosing which blockbusters to make, it'll be done democratically. All the fast food companies and the other tie-in partners, the toy people and so forth, will be allowed to vote on screenplays and then choose.
Puma gets a vote. The Dodgers get a vote.
Exactly. That's only fair. And therefore, that will be a more democratic and representative way of choosing the wannabe blockbusters. And then Harvey will be left to make his pictures on the other end of the spectrum, and the industry will live very happily.
We'll all go work for Harvey.
Happily ever after. John, will the industry live happily ever after in 10 years' time?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And good night.
I was, no, I get to agree with.
And he's got the profits to prove it.
We get to agree with everything Michael said, except what's the shot about German soccer?
Yeah.
I don't know what that meant.
It doesn't catch on.
I guess it'd be British to get that. I didn't understand that. I mean, 10 years out. 10 years out. 10 years out, a couple things are probably true. Put aside the digital stuff for a while. It doesn't matter which way it is. You'd probably assume that there'll be an extraordinary growth in the pure dollar value and need for the kind of product that we create, for the entertainment product that we create. Some there made reference to the growth of theaters internationally. That's certainly true. 10 years out, easy to see a double to a triple in the size of that business outside this country, particularly outside of Europe, where I think it's only really begun to take root. And all of the digital transmission technologies will probably bring some more dollars back to us as manufacturers of that product. You'd probably expect at that point in time, if you're 10 years out, now 10 years out, no one can be wrong because it's not going to come back here and be called on this 10 years out. 3 years we might be. But 10 years out, you would expect or hope that you would be seeing some more participation, a potential awakening giant inside some of the European operations and companies who begin to see that as something they should be interested in, which they should be doing either on their own or in coordination and cooperation with some of the American companies that do that as well. I don't think the fast food companies are going to get a vote, certainly not with us. I don't think we ought to be letting the fast food companies and the tie-ins. One of the sure ways to know you're going to lose money is if they start talking about the sequel before they talk about the first movie, or they start talking about the merchandising before they talk about the movie, then you know you're in trouble. You might as well set yourself on fire. That's the best thing that's going to happen to you that year. With that observation, 10 years out, sure, everything will be great.
Well, thank you all for that very, very interesting and witty view of 10 years from now. I'm sure everybody will make one of 7,000 reservations for 10 years from now, as Michael predicts in this vast Madison Square Garden. It will be held in 10 years' time. But we do have time for one or two questions from the folks here, so we'd love to hear from you.
Jesus Christ, you see.
I know they've solved all the problems for the next 10 years. But here is a question.
Hello.
Hi. Go ahead. Is someone...
Okay. Marion Dreyfus, Hearst. I'm stunned that no one mentioned the gerontological boom. The fact that there are teens doesn't negate the fact that there are going to be millions and millions of people in the Odd Couple 10 generation. And although they may not seem now to spend the money, they will then, because they're now trained into going to the films every day or 2 days or every week, and they will be spending money. So not to have a vision, any of the 5 of the panelists absolutely amazes me.
Nobody asked the question.
Well, and I'll tell you why I didn't mention it in the teen argument. Because so far what I've discovered, unfortunately, is that it's very rare that the boomers, even at 40, let alone 60 and 70, drive first weekend movie business. Because they're busy, because they can rent a movie, because they have a tremendous amount of middle-class other issues, they're not driving first weekend business, which more and more the business is driven by. Now, I can't imagine, and I look forward to a time when we're not driven by first weekend business, and I certainly look forward to being in my 60s and going out every Friday night and this reversing itself. But in trying to make pictures for grown-ups and in trying to make pictures for women even in their 40s, it's been an enormous problem to me, the degree to which our generation rents. And
they showed up for First Wives Club.
And they did. And when they're properly beckoned.
They showed up for In and Out. They show up.
They show up sometimes if you beckon them properly.
If you make, you know, I think there is a movie-going habit there. There is also a growing audience. You know, older, and the terrible thing is the TV demos say it's 30, you know, is it 35 and over, so that you and your aged great-grandmother are in the same target demo. Depressing observation. But there is an increasing resonance in that business, particularly female, today, and 10 years out, it would certainly be true that the movie-going habit that had been lost by the people who are now in their 60s, for a period of time, is definitely a trend that's, you know, a habit that has stayed with people who are in their late 40s and the boomers, late 40s, early 50s, and one would have every reason to expect that that movie-going habit is something that's going to continue, particularly in a changed motion picture viewing environment with better multiplexes offering more for you. You would see that would be something that you would expect would happen.
And their kids will be grown up and out and not able to go to the movies on the first weekend, so they will be, right?
Thank you. Next, please. Yes.
Sorry. Edgar Bronfman mentioned the fractionalization of the distribution and the many nodes that would be available when we go digital. What ways are studios using to protect themselves and their content when everyone has an opportunity to distribute this material?
What does that mean? Are you talking about pirating?
I'm talking about copyright and pirating. And
big issue. Huge issue. I mean, I think that the industry worries about, on the industry level, we worry about standards, we worry about anti-copying devices. As we deal with the so-called DVD issues, we're very much concerned with the issues which deal with regionalization on the machine, on the disc, anti-copying devices, things that they call watermarking, which prevent the copying of the item. I mean, it's very important for us. I think if we blow that and the notion that it's once you've done it once, it's out there and it's free, takes hold, that would be bad for us. However, we do live in an environment today where, given the current state of technology, there's an awful lot of piracy, and we spend an awful lot of time trying to police that, and are moderately successful in certain parts of the world, less successful in others.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Hillary Grinker, Megamax. We've been able to attract Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy to the large format business, more commonly known as IMAX, to produce the film Olympic Glory, which is the first ever film on the Olympics done in 70 millimeter. And my question to all of you is, will any of the studios step forward to produce films in the IMAX format? We've been able, as I said, to attract top Hollywood producers to our film, but we're curious to see what kind of collaboration we can put together with one of you.
Who'd like to take that one? Harvey?
I'm sure the IMAX format is a fantastic format to work on. And aren't you doing one? Isn't Star Trek?
There's a possibility of that.
Possibility of that.
Something, yeah. But I think it's an expensive format to work in. Sony did 2 films. They're not here today, but they did 2 films that they financed in the IMAX format. I don't know how well they've done economically on those, but so there is some interest in it.
Can I throw something out to the panel?
Yeah.
Do you guys ever get signed contracts and then all of a sudden the talent that you help make asks for big renegotiations and success with signed contracts?
I've never got a signed contract. So.
That was the right answer.
I knew I was doing something wrong. Come on, John.
What do you think?
You know what I think.
One other thing, talking of Billy well, before Billy Chris, any more questions from Mark?
That was then, this is now.
Yes, there's somebody here with a question. Yeah.
That was right.
Have we got a mic?
My name is Barbara Russell from Oppenheimer. Could you comment on how increasingly the actors that we see emerging in the film industry have been incubated by the television industry, and how that might have implications in the future for a paradigm shift in the networks getting involved in theatrical production someday?
You mean like Clint Eastwood?
I think that we basically will cannibalize talent from anywhere that it works now. There used to be a kind of hierarchical snobism towards television, and you went there when you couldn't get a feature anymore. And now, basically, our hunt for talent with heat that doesn't cost $20 million has taken us, obviously, to breaking television shows, because television is more interesting than it ever has been, to rock stars, to international stars. The stars are breaking globally, you know, from Jackie Chan to Ian McGregor to all the adorable Australian boys who broke this year, Guy Pearce. Those guys. I think basically the movie industry hunts everywhere, trolls every corridor for popularity, for charisma, for potential new movie stars, particularly in the early bargain hunting phase of their careers. We hired George Clooney for his first lead role, and his price quadrupled in the movie subsequently. And
more important, Linda, Jerry Springer just made a movie deal.
I heard that, actually. That's
what?
the talk of the industry.
What?
$2 million.
They're doing a Jerry Springer movie, in fact.
He's doing the Bible.
He's doing Noah.
It's actually shorter. Fewer commandments.
Thou shalt not omit adultery. Talking of the Billy Crystal's great line at the Oscars about, isn't it funny that a year ago Washington was complaining about there being too much sex in Hollywood, right? And that was Billy Crystal at the Oscars. But I mean, how have you all behaved, do you think, this year? Everybody complains about too much sex, too much violence. How have you all behaved this year, do you think?
Everybody's a big bore in Hollywood now.
Pardon?
Everybody's a big bore in Hollywood, really. They just work and go home and pass out. They barely make it to their
parties.
parties.
He didn't ask a personal question. I think he meant on the screen.
They're still a big bore.
Oh, yes. Harvey, you can
I thought you were comparing our conduct to President Clinton's.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to have something, you know, come up by, you know, spring or summer that will get us into, you know, hot water. It's how I work it out with Jack Valenti every year. You know, we're on a plan, so it's, you know, whenever I need to have a little of excitement, I just put it into the quarter. So there's a movie, Artemisia, about the artist that could be, maybe some will think is very, very sexy. And it's very, very artistic, so it's the perfect excuse to go out to the movies.
Absolutely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree with me that both in terms of their thoughts about the future and their wit and humour, our panel have given us a marvellous afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.